Hello everyone and welcome to LitFilmFest Live, where we discuss a classroom topic and a brand new book to go along with it to build a budding reading culture in your school. I'm Tim and tonight we will be looking at adventure stories mixed with environmental themes. Quite an interesting mashup today, and everyone is probably quite aware that that's something at the very heart of LitFilmFest, mixing that passion for literacy but also saving the world bit by bit and teaching our children how to do that. And tonight I am joined with a real adventurous environmentalist. It's BBC Sports journalist and author, Joe Wilson. Hello, Joe. How are you?
Tim, I'm great. Lovely to be with you. Thank you. An adventurous environmentalist. I love that. Thank you. I will try and aspire to that, live up to that depiction, not just tonight, but through the rest of my life.
Oh, wow. I've set you on your course now. You know you're sorted down that path.
Yeah.
Would you like to tell us a bit about what you've written?
Sure. So this is my book, The Island That Didn't Exist. There's a little poster behind me as well. You might just be able to see. It's the first book that I've written, and from idea to this finished form, Tim, it took me a mere 15 years. So, wow. I mean, if we come back in about 80 years, I might have a bookshelf, with my complete works behind me. So I wanted primarily, above all else, to write a book which was exciting. This was based on a vague idea I had walking along the coast somewhere so long ago, I can't really remember where it was. And that idea of what could basically possibly be happening on an island very close to where I was standing really set off a chain of events which became the plot. And I wanted it, Tim, to be, obviously it's fiction, but I wanted it to be just have that element of when people were reading it thinking, could this be happening? Is there just an element of possibility in this? So it's very much a book which is set in our realm, our world as we understand it now. And when we think about anything, I think in our realm, Tim, that issue of environmentalism in some form or another, I think it just has to be part of it. I don't really see how you can write anything which has some relevance to the world in which children live now, which doesn't have a reference to those issues.
I love that. Yeah, you can't remember where the idea started as well. It represents this need to actually look after everything then, rather than this very specific place, isn't it? It's an idea of I was inspired by nature, but that grows and gets bigger. And writing a wonderful work of fiction, which I'm very happy to say we have a signed copy to give away. For one lucky commenter or liker or sharer of the video. But there it is, just proof for someone's class. So please do like and share and sign. So that'd be lovely to have that up. But it's nice, isn't it, that expands into protecting a more of a global stage, really. Yeah.
So the specific thing that put the idea into my head, Tim, was I was walking along the coastline and I saw a sign towards an island, and it said, "This island is uninhabited and it's close to the public." So I thought, well, how does anybody know it's uninhabited if nobody goes there, Tim? So it made me think, what could be on this island? And could secret things be happening on that island? If so, how do they remain secret? Then, okay, what about if the whole island itself was in some way hidden? So that was the chain of thought. And the deeper I went into that, the more complicated it became. But you then have to simplify that into a very quick fire sort of adventure story. But what could be hidden, Tim, on the island that was so precious, so important that somebody would go to extraordinary length to conceal it? So what is the most important thing in our today and in our immediate tomorrow? To me, it's how we power things, isn't it? What is our energy? How do we keep going as a society for all those things that we rely upon? So if there could be a source of renewable energy that was somehow hidden, then that is going to be a power struggle for power, is the way I would perceive it, I guess. And really the great climax of the book, the battle on the island, in one way, shape or form, really comes directly down to that.
That speaks a lot to the modern reader as well. We're very conscientious, aren't they, about the environment? And to capture children's imaginations in an exciting way, as you've done, is really important, both in their writing, of course, but also in their reading. And just going back a bit, what was your relationship with reading and writing in school or as a young person? And I know you've got quite a history of writing, haven't you? Would you like to tell us maybe what's led you to the stage of being a published author?
Well, I think, Tim, I would consider myself to have been a professional writer for about 25 years, because everything that I do on news outlet for the BBC, whether it's on television or radio. They're my main outlets. And it's always sport that I do. But every piece that I do, every pre-recorded piece or even live pieces, similar to what we're doing now, I mean, it has to be written, and it's always written by me. You know, sometimes I think people get the impression that somebody comes along at 10 to 6 and says, here's your script to read out for the new year. It's actually a process, quite an intense process of, and bear in mind that you could be talking about a piece which is maybe only about a minute or a minute and a half of duration, Tim. So that boils down to maybe 6 sentences, 8 sentences. So to distill a story within that very concise framework, I think is quite a skill, and sometimes very tight timeframes to get it done. So this is a very different form of writing. And in a way, for me, it was a release, I think, Tim, to be able to just have that direct relationship, as I saw it, between my imagination and my laptop, you know, to get it done like that. But for me as a child, I mean, we were talking just now, weren't we? And I was telling you that I think I would have considered myself to be a keen reader when I was young. But if somebody told me, you know, this would be good for you to read this, it'd be important for you to read this, I would have immediately shied away from it. You know, I like things which either excited me or amused me. So I love the Tintin books. I don't know if you were aware of that. They'd be called graphic novels now, wouldn't they, Tim?
Yeah, they would. Yeah,
I think they were at the time. But I love them for the illustrations, but also for the plotting. But I don't think there was nearly as much choice for young people 30 years ago as there is now, Tim. I'm not sure what you think about that. But a lot of the books that I was kind of given were perhaps children's books that my dad would have read. You know, Jennings books or William books, or the Famous Five were read to me as a kid. And I think they were very exciting, clearly of a different era. But when I go into a bookshop now, or I certainly look online, I'm amazed, I'm overwhelmed by the number of wonderful books which are written by such conscientious and determined and passionate people.
It's interesting that you talk about a mix of your sports journalism and also being a writer now. And lots of teachers out there will be thinking, oh, I have a key stage. I have a year 5 boy who loves writing about sport. How do I transfer that passion to writing about fiction? Are there any tips or skill sets that you think cross over quite well for that?
Well, it's a really interesting point, Tim. I mean, I can remember going to watch, you know, a rugby match or a football match when I was, you know, young, about the age group we're talking about, middle grade, I suppose. And I'd come back and I'd record a little report on the radio as I saw it, just into my tape recording, you know. And that is, you know, that's writing, isn't it? I mean, I think the thing that a book like this and sport have in common is that fundamental thing of excitement, Tim. You know, I think when you're doing a sports report on the news, the lovely thing about it is that you have almost the obligation to be quite excited about it. You know, lots of things that happen in the news are actually pretty serious, aren't they? And pretty sad. And things that people don't want to happen, but people choose to be involved in sport, I think, because they like the idea of that unpredictability. So I think it's trying to, what the things have in common is that you're all the time trying to convey the sense of excitement and unpredictability that comes with sport. And certainly in a book like this one, that's really fundamentally what I wanted to express. I mean, in some ways, Tim, I think that, you know, a football match or a rugby match or something has its very defined framework of the time scale and the rules that will go on. And yet within that framework, people engage with sport because they want to be surprised. So I think of this book in the same way, is that you know it's a book, you know it's got how many chapters, you know that grammatically it will conform to a certain structure, but within that you really want to be thrilled, don't you? You want to be surprised by what happened. So that's
beginning, middle, and end, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. But you know, but when you're doing the beginning, you don't want to know what the end is, do you? You still want to as you go through it. So, and I think the same thing happens. That's fundamental to sport. If it was predictable, it wouldn't be sport, I often say, Tim.
Fantastic. It's nice to see that cross over, and you can see how maybe some disillusioned writers or readers of around age 10 would see that. Actually, that sounds quite exciting then. And just thinking, you really mixed genres quite nicely in this book. You know, environmentalism is a big theme at the minute. And why did you choose to write about it? Why do you think it was important for children to read about?
Well, I mean, I suppose my starting point was that I wanted to have this. The island is a classic setting, isn't it, for an adventure story, Tim? There have been so many islands and adventure stories over the years. And I think because it's a very distinct geographical setting, but it seems close to us. You can imagine an island being out there, and yet it's further enough away for extraordinary things to happen. So once I imagined the island, then I wanted it to be seen through the eyes of a 10, 11, 12-year-old. I think really that's why I chose to write it in this middle, that age group, really, in the middle grade age group, because I thought it'd be wonderful to discover the book, the island, through the eyes of somebody in that age. And I think you're right when you say that for people of that age group, an environmental awareness is just almost natural in the way that it wasn't when I was young. There used to be signs up saying, please throw your litter away when I was young. Now it's please recycle, So that's within the generation, the way it's all kind of changed. So when I was trying to imagine what could be so significant and so important on the island that would demand people to take extraordinary lengths to hide it away, really the only thing that I could think was really important would be something which might hold the secret to our entire environmental future. So that's where it is. The other element to it, Tim, as well, is that the backstory is that there was a group of scientists who kind of come from all different parts of the world, who try to come together for this invention. And I do think that's a very important theme in our culture at the moment, to think that actually that our national divisions kind of become irrelevant, don't they? Because if we don't sort this stuff out for everybody, everybody's going to fail. So but they're the big themes which I hope come into it. But the main thing is to initially to be gripped by the plot, I hope.
It's interesting that concept of globalism and unity, because that's definitely something that is quite strong at the minute, isn't it, with the pandemic and this, not just race for a vaccine, but also sharing of information has been quite powerful to the point where we've managed to develop something. So it's nice to see that theme come out so strongly in your book, and like working together and in order to save everyone is quite fortuitous in a way, isn't it?
Well, I'm always moved, Tim, when I talk to people who do much more serious jobs than me, who are much more intelligent than me and work in these fields, that, they'll be working with people from all over the world, and that actually that sharing of knowledge and of expertise, just as you say, I mean, it doesn't make sense to impose national divisions in that expertise, because I think we realize now we all either triumph or fail, don't we, as humanity? These are deep waters we're treading.
Very deep. That's what this show is all about. And how do you think teachers use fiction to inspire children to become interested in the environment? Have you seen any real life examples of classes reading your book and then doing any extra work on top of that? You're like, wow, I didn't think they'd do that based on what they read.
Yeah, I mean, I've been able to do, it's been a weird kind of year, obviously, goes without saying, Tim. And obviously everything that I do in terms of my writing and the promotion of it has to be done in my time off. So I'd originally sort of allocated a week of leave to go around to some schools and talk about various themes and what happened. But I'm delighted that I've been able to do some sessions a bit like this, and it's interesting that, because sometimes you don't get a clear idea about how the children are reacting. Sometimes you do. But I know that schools have done some great stuff with it as a resource. One of the ideas being that to imagine, your own island setting. And what I try and encourage children to think about is what would be on your island, sure, but what would make it secret? And why would it stay secret, And also, I think I get a strong feedback from people who've read the book and used the book, that they get a real sense of resilience, from the children involved, and the idea of sort of unifying for a common goal. And there are tensions between the children in the book about that all the time, about whether they're going to stay together or whether they're going to split apart, and their old loyalties and their new loyalties. So I think the sense of an island setting and the possibilities that brings is a real imaginative kind of springboard that I think schools and teachers have used with the book.
I love that concept of designing. I can imagine this outline on a big A4 piece of paper with, design your island just above it, just to start off children's own ideas of writing and scripting and, what wildlife is on there. Like you've got particularly you've got lots of gulls. They were quite instrumental on yours. Yeah. Bird life, which is an important aspect of the island, isn't it? But growing. So you know, to make your whole ecosystem, that's quite a creative process, isn't it? But based in, you know, something you can draw from real life.
Absolutely, Tim, and it does have that root in real life, doesn't it? Do you know what I mean? Because that's the thing. I think one of the challenges of writing the kind of fiction that I'm doing now, compared to say when Enid Blyton was doing it, is that we know so much about the world now, don't we? And that knowledge is so easily accessible through any kind of device or phone or whatever. But one thing that I noticed when I was researching this is that nobody actually knows definitively, Tim, how many islands there are in the world. Nobody's actually counted them. No, as far as I'm aware, nobody's counted them. Bear in mind, an island can be something the same size as my bedroom here, or the same size as Australia, you know. So in my mind, just the slight possibility that things could be going on islands really that we don't know about, you know, it's there. And for me, that makes a story more powerful, if you see what I mean. You know, that slight element of credibility as you're reading it makes it more powerful for me.
Brilliant. Is the answer in your book? Is that why it took 15 years? On the one of the last pages. This is how many islands.
Oh no, it's not. No, not to that. No. I mean, the 15. I mean, I would point out that I'm not just a really, really slow typer, Tim. You know what I mean? I wasn't doing a sentence a day for 15 years. For a lot of it, the book kind of stayed. It went no further than, you know, my head and maybe a couple of paragraphs on a Word document somewhere, which I then lost. I think it's a great act of faith, isn't it, to actually plow on and write something. I admire anybody who has done it, because you're never quite sure when you're in that process whether anybody's going to like it or even read it, you know.
Absolutely. So, you put yourself out there, don't you? It's like your creative soul put out. I feel for kids who have to do that in front of, you know, they have to read a sentence in front of their class and peers, but to do it on the internet is quite a task, I think.
Yeah, and I can remember from my own school days, I was lucky enough to have an English teacher when I was in what I would remember as the first year of secondary school, Tim, who was very open to when I would just write sentences in an unusual way, you know, even if it was a lesson where we were trying to display our mastery of speech marks, which I probably failed in. I would write things in a certain sort of flowery kind of way, and he loved it, you know. Whereas I can imagine some teachers in that position might have said, well, you know, what's this? So I you know, that power of inspiration that teachers have, and to give confidence, I think is immeasurable, isn't it? So important.
Is there anything you use in your writing to hook less regular readers?
I think very much, Tim. I would say that's the kind of the pace of it. And so I had a sort of the phrase in my mind when I was writing it was that I had a thing which I called the 12-page plummet. So that every 12 pages, something would happen to the characters or the plot, which would suddenly go, whoa, you know, you suddenly get a sense of where's that gone, you know. And roughly in my head, I thought that should happen every 12 pages, you know, so that then hopefully that prompts a hook, as you said, you know, that, okay, what's going to happen next, you know. So there's a dramatic twist or turn or some kind of development, or it's left. I mean, I think one of the chapters does leave it literally as a cliffhanger, Tim. So but it is that idea, I think, of all the time wanting to maintain a momentum with the book, if that makes sense, you know. Wanting to inspire a sense of, wow, what's going to happen next, wanting to turn the next page, I suppose, to put it simply. Because I think
keeping that pace, isn't it? It's important.
Definitely. I think whatever I read, Tim, and I read quite a lot of things, and some of it's fiction, some of it's non-fiction, but I want that sense myself. So I think absolutely I need to try and be able to convey that sense to my readers, you know.
Well, on that point, did you draw any of your ideas from any other wider reading that you took, maybe on environmental themes as well?
I think there was. It's funny how you get inspiration, is it, Tim? I think sometimes it's a kind of subconscious sort of process. I mean, it's funny when I saw the cover for this, which George Ermos did, which I loved. Oh, it was so good. And then I happened to be looking back through some covers of Tintin books, and there's a Tintin book called The Black Island, which I probably read when I was about 9. And the cover of it is remarkably similar. So, you know, subconsciously, you don't know what's going in, do you? You know, but I think I was inspired by what was around me, both physically and also in terms of the issues of the time. And I was, rather than being inspired by a sense of you know, time travel or fantasy elements. I've got nothing against those kind of things, but for me, I felt more inspired by something which I could link back to what was happening in the world around me.
Fantastic. Flora's written in. Thanks, Flora. You are in the running for our competition as well to win a free copy. So Flora says, sounds like a fab book. My son, year 6, would love it. He really enjoys adventure stories. Yeah, thanks, Flora. That sounds great. You've sold it well. Well done.
Well, that's kind. I mean, I think, you know, I don't know what you think, Tim, about what the ingredients would be for a classic adventure, what that genre specifies. But I think key to it for me is that the children are very much masters of their own destiny. Do you know that actually it's their own teamwork and their own bravery, or that actually gets the job done. You know, in an environment which they recognise. So they're not relying on superpowers or, you know, those kind of things to do it. They actually, it's their own initiative and their own powers and skills that overcome the odds with the help of seagulls. They're a very useful device.
Easy to train, are they?
They're so clever. You know, genuinely, they are so clever. I'm not sure whether they could actually do some of the things they do in this book, but it's just about possible, I think. They're the sheepdogs of the sky, I call them, because they're so trained. They are very clever, aren't they, Tim? They're amazing. So that's something that you know, any place you go, seaside or any playground, you see seagulls, and they're so adaptable.
They know how to nick an ice cream. I'll give them that.
They so do, don't they? They're going to take over the world, Tim. That's the thing. They're getting a bit.
I think they have. Absolutely.
Yeah. Getting too big for their wings, aren't they? But yeah, and I found writing it that if you're not, the interesting thing as a writer, I think, Tim, is that if you're not going to have superpowers and stuff, or magic or time travel, you know, how do you keep these plot developments happening? How do you keep making extraordinary things happen to ordinary people? And having some animals in there to even up the odds, it really helps. I found
that's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, now it's time to delve into your text in our quickfire fiction time. So let's take the segment. Right, Joe, you're going to read a short extract of your text for us, and then I'm going to ask you some probing questions about that to see how well you understand your own writing, but also we're going to make a classroom resource at the same time as well. So that teachers, you can use this on litfilmfest.com in the future. You can look at the extract that Joe will have has kindly given us to use for this, as well as him reading it, and see how he is answering his questions. And also you can give the questions for your children to see how they comprehend it. So it's over to you, Joe.
Halfway down page
your sound there, Joe.
Yes, I lost you. I couldn't hear you then for that last bit, Tim.
Okay. Well, it's over to you, Joe. If you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself and also where we are in the story. Let's give it another go.
Hi, it's Joe Wilson here, author of The Island That Didn't Exist. I'm going to read you a short extract here, starting halfway down page 41. Now, where we are in the story is that the hero of our book, the main character, a boy named Rickson Webster, has been told that he owns an island, except that everyone also tells him this island doesn't even exist. Now, he's determined to find it, so determined that he's borrowed a boat. To be honest, strictly speaking, he's just stolen a boat. With as much bravery as he could summon, Rickson twisted the throttle, wiped a strand of wet hair from his eye, and tried to focus on what lay ahead. He was approaching a wall of rock. It stuck out of the sea like a miniature mountain, dull grey in colour, stretching upwards roughly to the height of a house. Rickson didn't know why it was there, but then, why were rocks anywhere? The waves reared and crashed onto it while Rickson stared at it, his mind spinning. Is that it? He asked aloud. Is that all? Was this his island? The prized possession he'd risked so much to reach? Rickson felt a pang of excitement followed by disappointment. If that was all Splinter Island amounted to, then no wonder people had forgotten about it. It looked dangerous to go much closer, and there was not really any point. There was nothing more to see, until Rickson spotted the gulls. He'd been accompanied by a couple of birds throughout the journey, but they hadn't bothered him, hadn't really paid them much attention. Even though Rickson lived a decent distance from the coast, he was well used to seagulls. They were always in the playground, chasing apple cores or sandwich crusts. But suddenly there were seagulls everywhere. 20 now, no 50. More were arriving all the time. It became impossible to count them all. They swooped from the sky in groups, wings outstretched, gliding on the currents of wind until they became a cloud of feathers, circling and hovering. There was something else too, something which felt wrong. Rickson realized that all these birds, hundreds and hundreds of them, gathered together, were all silent. It was so quiet, the whistle sounded like an explosion. It was a noise the referee would use to start a match or a teacher to break up a schoolyard fight. But now, in the middle of the ocean, it was the sound which summoned the seagulls. They responded with a noise beyond Rickson's imagination. The cry from 1,000 seagulls sounded like the screech of 1,000 trains braking suddenly on their tracks, a piercing, ripping scream. It was as if a street of smoke alarms had suddenly been activated. Rickson covered his ears with his hands, but his eyes were wide open. The gulls were starting to do something utterly astonishing. In unison, they turned in flight, so the tips of their bills were facing the very top of the wall of rock. And then they bit it. They truly bit the rock. At first, Rickson thought there must be some kind of food sprinkled on top. Maybe this was a bizarre feeding ritual. But if there was food there, it was taking them an awfully long time to eat it. And all the gulls were still in the same position. Their wings were flapping, but their bills seemed to be stuck, clasped on the very surface of the rock, right at its summit, some 30 meters above Rickson's head. The birds were not moving, but the rock was.
Ooh, that was the dip. That was the dip there, wasn't it? Ooh, it's exciting. Like that.
Yeah, well, that's yes. I think. Well, yeah, that's a reaction. I think you hope to provoke, Tim. And if you can do that once or twice every chapter, then I think you've got a hope of gripping even a reluctant reader. Let's hope.
Fantastic. Okay, first question. Are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
How was Rickson feeling in the first paragraph?
In the first paragraph of the book, Rickson was feeling intrigued because he just had a piece of news which he maybe suspected would change his life, but he wasn't quite sure how, and he wasn't quite sure why. So he's intrigued, but also he was feeling that this was a chance to break free from a life that he found routine.
Interesting. In the extract, can you find two verbs to describe how the water moved?
How the water moved. Okay. The water seethed and it raged.
Oh, close. It was in your first paragraph. I'll give you a bit of time to just spot it in the extract that
we just read.
Yeah, it was in the first paragraph there.
You are actually
How does the water
testing
move?
me on the book, aren't you? Right.
Really testing.
Right. Let's go.
Starts with the waves. There we go. That's where it starts.
They reared and they crashed. They reared and they crashed.
Although you came up with two very good alternative words there. I really like that.
No, I was slightly bluffing. I was slightly winging it like a seagull.
Very good. Extra bonus point for puns. I'm enjoying that.
Okay.
Very good. Yeah. How do you keep tension and pace in this extract? What do you do as a writer?
So one thing I think, almost without thinking about it, Tim, now I look back on it, what I did is everything that we see and hear as a reader comes through Rickson. I think of Rickson actually as almost like a video camera, recording everything he sees and he hears. He has an extra element, of course, which is so beautiful in writing, that he also conveys what he's thinking. So I think because we see everything through his experience, it gives a directness to it, that we are living every moment through him. So that's one of the ways that I hope to establish tension. And the pace, I will try to maybe have a sentence which has one or two, three clauses in it maybe, and then bang, a really short sentence like, but the rock was, as punctuation points. And the way I perceive it is that stops the reader getting too comfortable in the rhythm of the text, that it can have a meandering kind of sense to it, and then bang, a shorter sentence to bring you back into the picture.
Whose perspective is the extract from? We'll just delve into that a bit more.
Absolutely from Rickson's, absolutely from the central character, Rickson Webster. And in fact, really everything in the book is, there's nothing that we really see or hear or feel that Rickson doesn't see, hear or feel himself. So really, he's not a narrator exactly. I wouldn't say that, he's not a first person narrator, but I'm sure students of English literature will know that there's a direct term for this. But I perceive it that he is our camera through the book, that he relays the experience directly through his eyes, through his lens, and we pick it up directly from him. So we live and we walk and we feel what he does.
That's nice. I like that he is the camera. It's not about him, is it, in a sense that he's not writing the words, but you can see it through his eyes, or maybe just above him in a way.
Exactly right, Tim. Yeah. Absolutely. And the lovely thing is that, as you say, when that you can, as an author, and this is why I think writing for me has been such a joy at times, is that you can also convey what he's feeling and thinking and emotions. And when you're making bits of television or whatever, how do you do that? It's very difficult.
Great. I really love this phrase, pang of excitement. What does the phrase pang of excitement mean?
I think it's that wonderful sense you get when you're reading, Tim, and it's a sense that I can date back to my earliest moments of reading, is when you read some words that surprise you and then wonder where it's going to take you next. I think that's the pang. It's the feeling of excitement there, but then the pang, the longing for what happens next. So it's that wonderful thing, the way that writing can hit you in a way that other media just can't, I think, because you're in control of it, aren't you, Tim? You feel that pang at your own pace, and then you decide when you go to the next bit, which I think is a beautiful intimacy of reading. That's why it's so special, I think.
There's also a real it's like onomatopoeia, isn't it? Like a pang, you can always hear it, can't you? So
yes.
Rickon has that pang of excitement, doesn't he, in the extract?
Yeah.
It's like almost like someone just strummed his heart, and he's so excited, isn't it, to see it? And
yeah,
that was a beautiful phrase. I really like that in the reading.
Good. Yeah, I think you're right. It's almost like a trigger, isn't it? A reaction that you can almost hear it and feel it, that some connection is made in his brain and hopefully our brain, that you can almost hear it happening. Yeah, hearing that connection being made.
How are the seagull's movements described? I can help you out a bit with this because there's quite a lot. There's loads of verbs you put in this.
Yes.
It's definitely third paragraph I
yes.
have. See how many you can spot. I found a few. Gliding on the currents of wind.
Yes.
I love that phrase. That's lovely.
Then they become a cloud of feathers, don't they? So I'm sure that they screech. I'm sure they soar and swoop at certain points as well.
Yeah, it's straight after that. So it starts from they swooped, doesn't it? They swooped from the sky.
Groups, wings outstretched, gliding on the currents of wind until they became a cloud of feathers, circling and hovering. So it's that sense of them being individual beings, Tim, I was trying to convey, and then them just amassing to become like a cloud where you can't see where one begins and one ends. But watching the movements of birds is thrilling, isn't it? Because they can go from stillness to speed so quickly. Yeah,
great. Oh, I like that. So your word choice there was to transition, through a series of verbs and adjectives going on there, from this individual to lots and lots, like a swarm almost, isn't it?
Exactly. And I could almost imagine, looking up and, those white grey colours of the feathers of, would resemble a cloud, wouldn't they? It's almost, they would be cloud-like, both in their colour and their form, massing together. And then also, as well as the description of what they look like, that sense drama that comes with the fact that they just suddenly were silent, Tim. You know,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
when you remove the sound from them, that's what's shocking. You know, there's suddenly, like, if you go into a city at 4 a.m. or whatever and there's no background noise, suddenly that takes you by surprise, doesn't it? Because it's what you're used to has been removed. So suddenly that enormous sound, almost unbearable, and then silence. So yeah.
And that has a sense of this kind of calm before the storm, doesn't it? That almost implosion, doesn't it?
Exactly. Yeah.
Which is a nice pace to have in reading. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
And when did you use a simile, and what was it describing?
You're really there's some good similes in this, aren't there?
Very good similes, yeah.
Like the screech of 1,000 trains breaking suddenly on their tracks. So that's that's similar. It's really interesting with similes, Tim. Sometimes I can remember, as part of the lengthy editing process of this, going through chapters sometimes and almost getting rid of all the similes. You know, actually you can really overdo them, I think. But at times, I think I suppose like anything, if it's a good simile, then I think it's worth putting in. And I try to avoid similes which are familiar or cliched. Do you know what I mean? That I think if you can actually have a simile which is an unusual one, I think that can provoke a reaction in the reader. You know, some similes are just almost like catchphrases, aren't they? And I think they then lose the power of simile because they're not really likening the experience to anything really particularly interesting. But the idea of 1,000 breaks screeching, I thought was quite. Sometimes I think they can be really powerful. And then it's also, I think, with children, trying to find a simile that is actually appropriate to their life and their culture. Tim, you know what I mean? Sometimes you find yourself thinking similes around, you know, records going round or something, and that's meaningless, you know. So smoke alarms are something which I thought children would be, and I think probably most children have had that experience of burning the toast maybe and the smoke alarm going off, you know, in the kitchen, and that's a horrible thing, isn't it? Unbearable, really. So yeah, there are a couple there definitely to get.
There's another one. It was so quiet, the whistle sounded like an explosion.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So
they're two really good ones that I thought were worth pulling out from this. Yeah.
Good. So then that idea of the whole shock of their suddenly going from silence to a sudden sound, I suppose. Yeah, absolutely. There's quite a simile heavy passage, this one. You're right.
But then that's where you write it, isn't it? It's the appropriate time to write a simile when, you know, there's lots of tension and it's, you know, you want to describe something quickly and understandably. So
I think that's very true, Tim. I think if every page has similes, you know, every passage has similes, then they lose their power, don't they? I think. Yeah. So sometimes I think you want that directness of just really using your words to, in a concise way, explain what's going on, and then sometimes similes can really come in, perhaps, as you say, passages of real emotion.
Great. Last question. You're doing really well, I must say. You're on a B grade at the minute, nearly on the A grade. Don't let us down now.
Okay, thank you, Tim.
I'm a hard teacher. This next bit I really enjoyed. The birds were not moving, but the rock was, and you really let that sentence drop, didn't you? You really,
yes.
It had a lot of weight behind it. What do you think is happening here, or what makes this an interesting last sentence?
Okay, so two things I think, Tim. Firstly, that those short sentences are quite a contrast to some of the, as we were saying, simile-laden, quite at times wordier bits of the descriptive elements of the passage that's just gone. So it's a contrast, I think, is a sudden, as you say, a drop in pace. And it's also, I think, the inherent contradiction in those sentences. You know, the birds do move and rock doesn't, you know, that's our experience of the world. You know, we expect birds to move and we assume that rock doesn't. So that illogical element to it, I think, immediately hopefully triggers something, makes you think, hang on, what's going on here? And then it leads you into the idea of, well, what is going on? You know, how can the rock be moving? Is it in fact moving? You know? So I think it's that short, sharp sentences which then suddenly move you into a position of thinking, what is going on here? So hopefully that's the you know, hopefully there is a pang that we can almost sense when somebody reads those sentences. Fantastic.
You get a solid passing grade there. Well done. Thank you for passing the quickfire fiction challenge. You did a great job.
Bless you. Okay. Can I resit next year?
No, unfortunately
Okay.
not. No,
Yeah.
we're not doing exams this year. Government order.
That'll change by the time. Yeah, it'll change by the weekend. Yeah.
It's been a real pleasure to have you on, Joe. And would you like to tell us where your book is available?
Yes, well, thank you, Tim. It's been lovely. It's been really interesting experience. Thank you for your questions and all the work you do promoting readers and writing. It's fantastic. The book is fairly widely available. It's on most websites. A lot of independent bookshops will have it and have promoted it. So, I mean, look on the websites where you would normally look. I know Foyles have had a sort of promotion on it quite recently. So,
Great.
whatever, if there's websites like that you normally use, there are the obvious ones which can do it. But yes, I know Foyles has had a promotion on it recently. And Heifer's Bookshop in Cambridge, quite close to me, have been very supportive of it as well. So I know that people have been buying it directly from them.
You always support the local bookshops, isn't it? But if you have to go out, I'm not going to judge, but as long as you're reading, that's the important thing, isn't it? So.
Of course, absolutely, Tim, absolutely. And, you know, when I was young, I did read books, but I loved reading newspaper reports of rugby matches and football matches and cricket matches. So there are lots of ways in to the joy of reading, aren't there? And I think sport can be a good one, simply because sport by its very nature is quite exciting.
Great. Well, and also thank you for providing us a copy. We are going to be giving this away, a signed copy by Joe himself, which is lovely. All you have to do is like, comment, or share. The competition closes in a week's time on the 23rd of December, just in time for Christmas, so you find out whether you're a winner or not. Each action classes as an entry, and UK and Ireland only. Also want to ask us a question that we can pass on to Joe as well, or tell us what your thoughts were with your class, and we'll happily tweet you or pass them on. And we'll put a direct link to your book also at the bottom of our blog and resource as well, Joe. So if you do fancy buying a copy for your class or selection, please just find the links below. Also, keep your eyes peeled on the LitFilmFest website. We will be editing this as a classroom resource for you to use, and that is available for you. Thanks a lot, Joe. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much, Tim. I really appreciate it. It's great fun. Thank you.
I'll have you on again. Take care. Many thanks also again to Joe for that. That was a great interview, wasn't it? Lovely to have him on. If you are an elite educator as well, you stand an increased chance of winning. So please find out how to be an elite educator at litfilmfest.com. And in a week's time, we'll be looking at Enchanted Christmas Tales with Catherine Fisher. So please tune in for that and send in any questions you've got from your class or even as a teacher about how you could use Christmas tales or enchantment tales in your own learning to really bring a buzz about building a reading culture in your school. Other than that, I've just got a little bit to tell you about Reading Rocks and Quickfire Write. We've been producing the Quickfire Write challenges especially for you and your class and home learning. We've released many of these projects for free, so your children can learn about how the world works with a simple video before writing about it themselves using the Quickfire questions. We've also included lots of other activities to keep your children engaged around this topic. So you could teach this in one afternoon, you could teach it remotely if your bubble has burst, or across a whole week's worth of lessons. And finally, we're hosting many of the Reading Rocks review projects for free this year. They're designed to inspire a love of reading across your school by simply reading a book, using the Reading Rocks review project to review a book, and then create a video review of that. They include planning, whiteboard slides, supporting resources, and videos to inspire a love of writing and reading in your class. So check everything out online at litfilmfest.com. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next week. Take care, everyone.